Morning, Acklam, and welcome to the final live assembly that we've got for this half term. Who would have believed that when we broke up for Christmas, many of us would still be at home waiting for school to start again. So hopefully it's just around the corner for us, and we'll be back to normal as soon as we can. So before I introduce this week's special guest speaker, I just want to talk to you about Safer Internet Day, which just happens to fall on Tuesday, which is 9th of February this year. So I just want you to consider this question. Do you think you act any differently when you're online? Whether it's on FaceChat, Snapbook or TalkTick, whatever you kids are on nowadays. And I want you to think how we express ourselves when we're online is becoming more and more important, especially now we're spending even more time online. Now we're in lockdown. And maybe sometimes we forget about the impact of the actions that we can have on others when we're online. Could make us more likely to post a trolling comment or put a picture that we wouldn't normally show in real life. But just have a think, how could it affect our real lives? There's a short clip we're just going to watch just to make us think about that.
Welcome to the Google Online Safety Roadshow.
We're here to teach you a few things you need to know so you can stay safe online
And enjoy all of the fun things that the web has to offer.
Think before you share!
The web connects us all,
And allows us to share in ways we have never before been able to.
whether through social media posts, comments,
Or even videos.
we can reach friends near and far with just a click.
But what you share on the web and who you share it with can end up saying a lot about you.
And can become a part of your life story. You can't control information once it's out there in the world.
What you post or send can easily be forwarded, copied, or found by other internet users.
Including strangers.
Or people you know who aren't necessarily your friends.
Other people's impressions of you can change based on what you share.
And posting inappropriate information can have negative consequences you may not have considered. That can mean impacting your place on the soccer team, summer job opportunities,
Or even one day, what college you go to.
The internet is an awesome tool for having fun and making new friends. But with great power comes great responsibility.
So use your power for good. You can just as easily lose friends as make them, based on how you manage your reputation online.
So don't forget,
To think before you share.
Well, hopefully that's given you something to think about and some top tips on how to keep safe whilst you're online. So now it's Miss Tyler's turn. She's going to be our special guest speaker this week. She's going to give us a really great insight into life inside a prison. And as usual, got some fantastic follow-up questions to put to her as well.
Morning everybody. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about a job I had before I started working at Outwood Academy when I used to teach in a prison.
Good morning, Miss Tyler. I was wondering, were you ever scared in working in a prison?
Was I ever scared? That's a question I probably get asked most often when I tell people that I used to teach in a prison. No, I wasn't ever scared. There was a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the trainees, they treated me as someone that was there to help them. I was a teacher. I wasn't, a prison officer. My role was different, and they knew that I was somebody that they could talk to and someone that they could trust. So they weren't. It was not in their interests to try and scare me, really. The other thing was that outside every classroom or along the corridor where the classrooms were a couple of prison officers. So if ever one of the trainees got angry or didn't want to be there or anything like that, I could just poke my head around the door and say, could you take this lad back to his unit, or back to his cell. And then in extreme cases, which was I only ever used really to protect the trainees from each other rather than from anyone wanting to have a go at me. There was a button on the wall behind me which I could press, and that would send alarms off all around the prison, and then lots of prison officers would come running over from all directions and take the trainee or trainees out that were fighting or whatever it was that they were doing. So it wasn't really scary. And the other thing that just struck me recently is that when I was teaching there, it was a bit like social distancing, how the classrooms are now, really, because I was never allowed to sit next to them, to the trainees. They were always a bit more spread out. They sat on tables by themselves, and also I was not allowed to put myself in a position where I couldn't get to the door. So I always had to have the door right behind me. I could never have a trainee between me and the door. So yeah, it was a bit similar to what we've got now, actually. With so it was a bit strange, but it was for a good reason, same as it is now.
I'm Hakim and I am in year 7. The question I would most like to ask is, what was the hardest thing about working in the prison?
The hardest thing, Hakim, there was a couple of things really. The hard thing was when the lads would move out of the prison. So they might only come to 2 or 3 lessons, and you over a couple of weeks, and you get to know them and you get to work with them, and they start sort of engaging with things, and then they're gone again. So I couldn't really see how they progressed over their course of their education, like you do at school, where your teachers are following what you're doing, they're keeping note of your progression and helping you at all stages. I couldn't do that, so that was a bit frustrating. And the hardest thing for me really was just the sad stories that some of them had, and how they'd ended up in prison just because of circumstances, had poor life chances, or didn't have good experiences at school. So people, the teachers weren't like they are at Acklam. They weren't taking care of them. So there's lots and lots of different reasons why they ended up in prison, and it was often really sad. And sometimes I'd come home from work feeling quite upset about some of the things that they'd told me, because they were really, a lot of them were still children. They were having to deal with adult issues, and they were in a prison. It wasn't like a boarding school or anything. I remember being once very shocked. I had to go and for the first time to go over to the wings where their accommodation is, and I was only used to seeing them as students that come into my classroom, so I always thought of them as students really, not as inmates. And I remember how shocked I was the first time when I went into the wing, where they were literally in single cells behind locked doors, and I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me, and I found that quite distressing actually, to see young people and in that position. It's no life to live when you're a teenager, is it?
Good morning, Miss. I'm from year 7, and I was wondering what was the best thing about working in a prison.
What was the best thing about working in a prison? That's a really good question. The best thing, I think it was just the small things, rather than big things. So I remember once there was a trainee who'd had a very difficult upbringing. He'd grown up in a challenging area in London, because most of my trainees were from London, from Brixton and Peckham and places like that. And he was complaining one day that no one listens to him, nobody in the government cares about him, or the problems that young people in where he's from have. So I said to him, why don't you write your MP? And I had a bit of a chat about what that meant and why he should write a letter to his MP. But we did. We wrote a letter between us, and then he got a letter back, which was in a proper envelope from the House of Commons and things. And he was so thrilled that an MP had actually listened to what he'd said and written a response. And he just couldn't believe it that someone in authority like that had listened to the issues that he had. So it was lots of little things really, when someone understood what you were talking about, or really engaged with the topics. It was little things, and it was often quite funny. Funny things would happen, like a time that we were doing a PSHE lesson. We were talking about babies and how babies had formula milk. So we decided to make up a cup of formula milk for them to try. And because they were trying to show off in front of each other, one of the lads took a big swig of this formula milk and then projectile vomited it across the classroom. So that was quite entertaining. So there were moments when it was really very funny.
Good morning, my name is Holly and I'm in year 7. I was wondering what a typical day like for an offender and a teacher in prison.
So a typical day working in education in the prison would probably be about 9 to 5. So longer than a school day. That's because the trainees would have to go back to their cells for a couple of hours over lunchtime. The lessons were sometimes 2 hours long, so they were quite long lessons. Usually I had about six trainees at one time in a class, and they would do they did PSHE and citizenship with me, and money management as well. And they did maths and English, which they had to do because a lot of them were under 16, so it was compulsory for them to do those subjects. They did cookery, which was really popular because it meant they could get some extra food, because the prison food wasn't great. They also did things like motor mechanics, and they did bricklaying and painting and decorating, and they also had something that was known as the Raptor Project, which was where they could work with birds of prey, which really helped calm them down. So it was a bit different to being in a school, but some elements were quite similar.
Hello, I'm Shoba from Year 7, and I would like to ask, why were some of the offenders in prison and how long were they?
So there were 2 different young offenders units at the prison where I worked. There was one, the main part of the prison, where there was a higher number of trainees. It was quite a big prison, and they were mainly in prison for things like stealing cars, theft, drug dealing, burglaries, that kind of thing. Still serious, but they had slightly shorter sentences. Sometimes they'd only be in for a couple of weeks, sometimes they'd get transferred to other prisons, and sometimes they maybe get 1 or 2 years. And then there was the other part of the prison where I worked a couple of days a week, and that was for trainees who'd committed serious offences. So even though they were teenagers, some of them still got given sort of life sentences, which probably meant sort of 10, 15, 20 years depending on what they'd done, which is a very long time in the life of a teenager, really. So it was sad that was the position they were in.
Thank you, Miss Tyler, for talking to us today. It was very interesting to find out about what you did before you came to Outwood Academy, Acklam.
Well, that's it for this half-term's live assemblies. Hope you enjoyed watching them, and you're looking forward to seeing some more next term. We've got some fantastic guests lined up for us, and that are going to take us up to Easter. So for now, stay safe and enjoy the holidays wherever you aren't going.